Okay, so welcome back, and we are in late April 1852, and we have been at war with the Russian Empire now for 1 month. You may recall that when we left off in early April, the Russian army in the west was sitting in Bessarabia, having surprisingly not done anything. We thought perhaps they were waiting for additional forces, or it wasn't really clear what their intentions were. In the east, the Russians had attacked. We were falling back and really just kind of screening with Abdi's force, looking to concentrate further forces in Erzurum in order to lift the siege at Kars. Kars is under siege, the structure is intact, and the Russians so far are sitting tight in the east. You can probably see from the map that the situation has changed in the west. Over the last 2 weeks, then, the main Russian army in the west has marched from Bessarabia. Pretty astonishingly, this is quite a long distance to cover in 14 or 15 days. They have marched from Bessarabia through Constanta, Varna, bypassing the garrison of Varna, through Rumelia, and has slammed headlong into our main field army stationed in Adrianople. They marched so quickly through Varna and Rumelia that they really only have limited control over this region, and as I said, they bypassed the garrison. Their posture was set to bypass any resistance in towns or cities. And we have had our first major battle of the Crimean War, and it has happened in Adrianople. It was not clear really what the Russian intention is here. I mean, this is a very rash, very risky move. Our calculation had been that the Russians would be required, they would need to take Plevna, they would need to take the depot here, which linked up with their depot in Odessa, would provide the basis for further, more kind of sustained operations in the Balkan Peninsula. Ignoring this supply requirement, they have instead gambled on taking Adrianople, presumably in one fell swoop, and then moving on to take Constantinople, perhaps looking to take us out of the war as quickly as possible before the strength of the British and the French can be felt. If the British and the French indeed even intend to make much of an intervention. Of course they did in real life, but we can't be sure that they will here. This then was our baptism of fire, the first acid test of the Nazim el-Jadid, of the new model army. And let's have a look at the results of this first great battle. We should say that the Russians arrived in Adrianople on day 15, which is the last day really before the beginning of the late April period. So this battle may actually be ongoing, and what we're looking at are the results so far. It's not clear really, but it was a fairly short battle, and we can see from the results that it was not successful for the Russians, and this is wonderful news that will be well received at Topkapi Palace. The Russian army was about 110,000. Our main field army was of a similar size actually, but of course Reza Pasha is able to draw on other forces in Adrianople, including a reserve army corps stationed in the citadel and the garrison itself. So the combined strength of all of the forces we have in that region is about 175,000 men, 15,000 horse, 686 cannons. The Russians can draw on 110,000, about 8,000 cavalry, and about 500 cannons. Our losses then, 22,000, 3,600 horse, Russian casualties, nearly 45,000, a shade under 45,000, and 1,000 horse. And this battle, of course, falls heavily into the win column. This is very, very good news for us, and would have been the first significant Ottoman victory over the Russian Empire in some years. So we can take, we can sort of be very pleased with this indeed. And the general in charge of the Russian army, Prince Ivan Paskovich, we can see from his statistics that he's a pretty aggressive commander. He does have a high strategic value, so he can move his forces quite quickly and to often cover quite long distances under the right conditions. He has 2 lieutenant generals. We have 3. He has 2 lieutenant generals in his staff. Dmitry Oskin-Sakin, who is not a terribly remarkable general looking at his stats. He's got a decent enough strategic value. And Nikolai Moryav-Kars, who, much like Prince Paskovich himself, is a fairly aggressive commander. So it may be the fact that they have a particularly aggressive command that lends itself well to kind of, fast moving, kind of aggressive actions, then this may have shaped this rather rash decision. First victory in the bag. This is really, really good news, and we hope it's going to be the first of many to come. In terms of what the Russians do from here, remains to be seen. They are sort of isolated. I mean, the only supplies that this Russian army has, of what's going to be around 80,000 men now, is going to be what they're carrying on their back, what they have in their supply train. They're going to be hard pressed to draw supplies from anywhere else, unless they fall back, which I think is their only option. Fairly predictably, Reza Pasha, as not a very remarkable commander, not a commander with any great stats. He is not activated this turn, so of course he is not going to be in any kind of position to exploit this victory, which is a shame, but it's also rather predictable. He's a kind of corrupt sort of political maneuverer. He's not someone that's likely is likely going to risk his command in any kind of what he would consider rash decisions. Or he may be absent from his command, quite likely in Constantinople, eager to be the one to tell everyone that he just won a great victory. So we'll see what happens from here. A couple of measures that I have taken then is we can see from the battle results that though the Russians suffered heavier losses than we, it looks like some of our losses were heavily concentrated into particular formations, and it looks like it's one of the cavalry divisions. I mean, we've lost two light cavalry regiments, one heavy cavalry regiment, and if we have a look inside. I've actually removed this division then and deposited this division inside the citadel at Adrianople, and we can see that this force, we're going to set this force to evade combat, and as a passive posture this would accelerate its capacity to receive replacements and this sort of thing. And we can see that it was this division, in fact this is what all the remains of this division is, the remnants of a heavy cavalry regiment and its horse artillery. So this division is almost destroyed in what was likely an ill-advised or poorly timed cavalry charge. What we have done to bolster this force up slightly is one of the army corps, which was under the command of Zarif Mustafa Pasha. We've actually removed that and we've switched that with the reserve formation. The reserve formation now sits with the garrison. We can see it here. It's received some losses. It has some. Its organisation is somewhat disrupted because it's just been involved in a large battle. And the purpose of this is just to ensure that Reza Pasha's force at all times is in the best possible situation. It has fresh troops. He has fresh troops at his disposal. And the corps which suffered the heaviest losses, we've switched out. We've popped into the garrison at Adrianople, and that force will begin receiving replacements and so on. But yeah, really, really good news. Really, really happy with that. We'll see what happens going into early May, and hopefully it is the case that the Russians are not finished here. It may be that the Russians feel, being that it's an aggressive commander, it may be that this is also an ongoing action, but it may be that the Russians will conduct another large offensive in Adrianople. That would be good. I think would be well placed to defend against that. I think the Russians are in they're in a weak position, having been defeated in this opening engagement. So good news there. In terms of in the east, nothing significant to report. Abdi Pasha's force falling back is kind of screening. He was engaged very, very briefly in Kars. He was defeated, but sort of defeated by default because he is set to withdraw. He is set to not engage, and he would have experienced some measure of disorganization falling back. He did suffer 3,500 casualties. The Russians suffered almost no casualties at all in this case. And he simply didn't engage them. He was simply looking to create distance between him and the Russian force. Many of those casualties have actually already been made up with replacements, and also Hussein Avni now is in theatre. He's in Erzurum, and he's joined with Abdi Pasha's command, providing him with more commander points. And the army corps, which has been force marched from Sinop, is now almost there. It's about 14 days away. Once it arrives at Erzurum, of course, it'll be completely disorganized and exhausted, and this force will require some time, anything from 2 weeks to a month, to reorganize itself and to be combat worthy. Once it is combat worthy and joins this force, then things may become interesting. We may then be in a position to make a move to relieve the siege at Kars. Now, one thing that was noteworthy in the kind of very brief screening action at Kars is we can see that the Russian force is ever so slightly smaller than it was than the first engagement that we experienced, which again was a kind of screening engagement. We were falling back. But we can see that they have about 10,000 less men. They had 77,000, I think, before. They've got 65. So they've pulled out a division, possibly calculating that, you know, the only thing that we have in this area is one army corps, and that they really need to sit tight, besiege Kars, and then press on. There's nothing that can really challenge them. So it may be that they've just lifted a division out, sending it north. Possibly they're going to relocate that division into the European theatre, but we'll see what happens there. But good news so far then. So nothing sort of too dramatic in the east. No significant defeat or anything. The key thing now is we hope that the supplies in Kars are enough to really keep the garrison holding out for long enough that we can kind of move into relieve it. It's a pretty decent fortress. We've got a decent sized garrison of about, I think it's about 40,000 men. We've got set to hold at all costs. They've got integrated artillery support, fortress guns built into the kind of citadel. So yeah, fingers crossed that those guys are going to be kind of okay there. It's going to be a month at least, really, before we can kind of relieve that force. The small cavalry brigade then was in quite some sort of it was in a situation of disorder in Kut after having suppressed or dealt with a very sort of small local insurgency. It's now recovered somewhat. We're using some riverine points to move these guys back to Q8, which is their kind of station really, and the Baghdad division is back home. Khurshid Pasha still en route to not Constantinople, to his command in Adrianople. He will be given one of the cavalry divisions in Ritsa's army, which will mean that we'll have, you know, our staff will be comprised of almost entirely of a kind of elite or proper generals. And we can see that these aren't just generals, you're actually lending them your staff. So Abdi Pasha actually has a staff of 12 men. He is one of 12. So yeah, what we're really doing is moving Khurshid's staff, professional staff, to take command of one of those divisions. The only other battle that took place was at the mission in Misurata, or at Sirte. We managed to sort of discover the force there, the insurgency, mostly light Cameliers, cavalry, light cavalry, 2,000 men, and we inflicted 1,000 casualties for 600 of our own. Some of those casualties were prisoners, where they sort of just gave up almost fairly instantly. Hopefully, by early May, this situation would have been dealt with, and we can move the Tobruk division back to its station. That is it, I think. The only other thing to add in terms of sort of military developments is we're going to look to build another cavalry division, I think, in Sinop. And the cavalry division that we have, we're actually going to move to the east. We're going to move to the east, link up with Abdi Pasha's force, to provide that force with a bit of a mobile element. It improves its reconnaissance, it will improve its fortunes a little bit in the field. It will incur a slightly greater command penalty, but it may be balanced positive. I think that, you know, we are going up against pretty much an entire Russian army here. And yeah, my thinking is that let's bring what we can in, and we only have a small brigade to the south, and these forces I think we're just going to keep where they are, to discourage smaller Russian forces from raiding or penetrating deeper into our territory. So we're going to relocate that. This may just be a temporary measure. It's going to take 28 days. It may be the case that this cavalry division is just really too late. You know, we're on the clock, frankly, with what happens in Kars. We can't leave this city being besieged indefinitely. Once this city falls, the next target will be Erzurum. Erzurum, we did begin building a fortress in Erzurum, and it's being built right now. Let's have a look at that fortress, see how long it'll take. Okay, yeah, so I mean it's going to be sort of 100 days or so. I think it's going to be some time before it's complete, but the construction has begun, and that will afford Erzurum, the town of Erzurum, the depot there, with some measure of protection, and slow the Russian advance should Kars fall. We have Trabzon, which is fortified, Erzurum to the south. So again, sort of calcifying the frontier as best we can will slow them down. Once they take Erzurum and Trabzon, then it's a different story. They have completely open kind of field really in eastern Anatolia, so we want to stop this happening. The idea is we want to bog them down around Kars. We want to make sure Kars doesn't fall. We want to lift that siege ultimately and throw them back into the southern Caucasus. In terms of economic developments, we've had enough manufactured goods now and capital for some time to begin to expand our manufacturing base again in Constantinople, and we have done that with the beginning of a second textile factory. The first textile factory, which is the very first manufactory that we've begun building, will, I think, be completed this summer, and that'll be an important step, followed possibly by the shipyard. And we've also invested some manufactured goods and state revenue. You can see our state revenue is looking fairly low now in upgrading the fortress at Constantinople. The reason being is if we do end up pursuing the Russians to the north and conducting a campaign in the sort of northern Balkans, or even pursuing them towards Odessa, we want to make sure that in the event that a Russian force is landed in Constantinople, that we are bought as much time as possible. It won't make Constantinople impenetrable, but Constantinople is a large city. It's larger than probably the next 3 or 4 cities that we have combined. It is, the economic heart of our empire as well as the administrative heart, and it's obviously something that the Russians do have an eye on. It may be the case that this move by the Russians was really aimed at taking Constantinople as quickly as possible. So we think that it's worth building up the fortress here. What we're doing is upgrading it to a modern industrial fortress. What we have is really the inheritance of a kind of late antiquity and medieval and early modern fortress, beginning with the walls of Justinian and upgraded since, but we're now actually building a proper modern brick fortress with gun emplacements and this sort of thing. That's it economically. It's been a good round economically. Exports are staying fairly solid. We have set our trade balance, and we've noticed that we've got a stockpile now of gems from our holdings, the Eastern Arabian Peninsula. Some of this will be converted into state revenue in the next month or two, and that'll bolster up our position because our state revenue is starting to look a little bit dry now. We've invested money into 2 fortresses, and of course we fairly recently built an entirely new army corps, recruited and furnished an army corps in Sinop. So exports are sitting at 277. My thinking is that this year we're going to reach the 300 milestone. That's the hope, that by sort of December 52 we will be averaging around 300 private capital in terms of domestic market sales. Trade balance is not great at the moment, but that is because we're kind of making a big push to hoard manufactured goods, which is required for building certain kinds of military units, furnishing military units, building manufactories, but also building fortifications. And very soon we hope we're going to be in a position to actually build manufactured goods factories. This is something we don't really have the technical capacity to do yet. This is a feature much more of a kind of more broadly the Industrial Revolution, and that's something that is very, I think, is sure to arrive. The sort of theoretical capacity to build locomotives, to start building manufactories on a kind of rational basis, I think this is going to arrive in the Ottoman Empire in the next year or two. So we want to start accumulating manufactured goods, private capital for when it does, and we want to start laying railroads in Constantinople and this sort of thing. That is it for now. There's nothing else to report. The next report back is going to be in the next fortnight. We'll follow the war really, really closely. So the next report back will be early May 1852, and we'll see we'll see how the situation develops in Adrianople. My hope is that there's going to be another battle. My hope is that the Russians, try and sort of try again. I mean, it's either that or they fall back with their tail between their legs all the way back to Bessarabia, really. One measure we have taken, I should point out very quickly, is we have a very small, it's a brigade-sized force comprised of 2 regiments, Kazakh, sort of irregular cavalry, or light cavalry, really. And we're going to move these chaps around. We're going to hook round and try and consolidate the rear. Now, the garrison in Varna will gradually increase our military control of Varna, which currently sits at 62%. We lost some military control, of course, because a large Russian force moved through here. And this cavalry brigade is set to retreat if engaged. We don't want it being completely decimated by a big Russian army that's falling back. But the idea is we want to try and get control of Rumelia. And one thing we have to consider is that they do have access to a port at Rumelia, so that's their only real base of supplies. If we can quickly take Rumelia, that pinches off their supply source. That said, I don't know how they can move supplies from Rumelia. They don't have anything in the trade box, the Black Sea trade box, unless they move something in there rather quickly. The fleet did conduct a standing patrol in the Black Sea, I should say, also. Didn't engage anything. Weather was a little bit kind of hit and miss, I think, so it may be that Russian forces sort of slid by, and they simply weren't spotted. We've set the fleet to short bombardment. We're moving these chaps now into the Bosporus, and if they can lend their guns to support Rita Pasha's field army at Adrianople, you know, why not? It's an opportunity that's kind of presenting itself. We'll sit them there for the next, well, it'll take them 2 days to get there, so they'll be sitting there for sort of 12, 13 days. And if they're unable to shell Russian positions, then ultimately we're going to move the fleet back into Constantinople just to recover some supplies and foodstuffs, and to give the crew some leave, and to develop some kind of reorganization of the fleet before we conduct further operations. The raiding fleet in the Mediterranean trade box has not spotted anything, has not engaged anything. Weather has cleared now. My thinking is probably in May will be the last opportunity for a while for them to interdict Russian shipping, or any kind of shipping that is in the trade box. If they don't, they will be pulled back probably to Smyrna, just for a period of time again, to replenish supplies, to give the crew some leave, and just to reorganize the ship's crew. So I will leave it there, and the next video will be early May 1852. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.